the case I worked on with the Innocence Project was a sort of a run-of-the-mill, I don't want to say, there's no really run-of-the-mill, but it was just a case that came to our office for someone who was claiming their innocence and was seeking seeking a new trial or seeking redress from what they from what they believed was a wrongful conviction. And it was a case I got involved in, and it had many sort of twists and turns. And the way I got involved with the Innocence Project was I had been working on this case essentially as a solo practitioner, doing and I was handling it pro bono. It was a case such as Chester Hollman, as a case I came to believe in the client's innocence, and these were humble people. They were not wealthy people.
I have to stop you because there are people that do not know what pro bono means.
Okay, so I basically did it for no fee. They originally hired me to do an appeal, and once I got into the case and saw what was involved, and we developed some other evidence of Chester's actual innocence, I decided I could not. I had to do this case as a matter of conscience and not for fee. So totally a matter of conscience. So other than that, the initial appeal, the rest of the work was done, for free, basically. So,
which is what pro bono means. So I do need to clarify this.
Yes, right.
You were a private attorney trying to make money, and you said,
correct. I was in business, and but the great thing about being in business for yourself is you get to make these decisions. And this was a decision I felt that called for, I think it called for this kind of effort. So I got involved in the case and was doing mostly my own investigation and my own work. And then in the middle of the case, I represented Chester for close to 15 years. So I'd been working on the case for about 6 or 7 months, and 6 or 7 years, I should say. Sorry, and the Innocence Project hadn't even, at least the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, didn't exist when this case started. It was founded, I think, in 2010. And I knew the director. We had worked together
as a public defender.
And I called her up to congratulate her, and she said thanks, but she's like, we have no cases right now. You have anything we might be interested in? I said, do I ever? So we signed up with the Innocence Project, and they provided they provided investigators and lawyers to help us, and it became a collaboration, essentially.
Okay, so we're talking about Chester, this case, which was an amazing case. My paralegal said that she watched the Neflix episode with you in it because she knew I was interviewing, and she said she bawled the whole time crying. So
I can't watch it and not cry myself.
So tell us about Chester. Tell us,
So Chester is a young man, this is in 1991. He's a young man, grew up in suburban Wilmington, did not, grew up in a very kind of conventional suburban life. His parents both worked. They were churchgoers. He went to high school. He was in the band. He played football. He did a lot of different things. And when he graduated, he was going to community college. He gets a job working for an armored car company, if you could believe it, and was going to community college. And I had an ambition to go into law enforcement. I think he thought he might become an FBI agent, I think even. And he just moved to Philly because a lot of the work he was doing was in Philly. He was interested in getting out of the suburban life and a little more excitement. And gets stopped one night with a friend, a young woman. It was not his girlfriend, just a friend. Gets stopped because he's driving a car that matched the description of a getaway car that had just been used in a robbery shooting, turned out to be a murder, several blocks away. He gets stopped. He gets brought down to the homicide unit. Detectives were convinced he was the one involved. partly because of an incredibly outlandish coincidence, which I'll explain in a second. And they essentially coerce. He gives a statement that, basically a statement, explaining what he'd been doing. It's an innocent statement. It's an exculpatory statement. But his friend gets coerced into giving a false statement that they had been involved in this robbery and murder. And on the strength of that, and on the strength of another coerced statement they took from a guy who was on probation and out on bench warrants and a long criminal history and mental health history, he gave a corroborating statement. They charge Chester. He goes to trial and loses. Now, why was he stopped? Here's the incredible, outrageous coincidence that occurred. The crime happened in Center City. It was two just summer students at Penn were coming home late at night, like 1 a.m. from campus to go back to their apartment. And a car rolls up, guys get out, they jump the guy and his girlfriend, and they take his wallet and shoot him in the chest and kill him. They then jump back in a getaway car that's being driven by another woman, and they drive off. And it was a summer night. There's a lot of people out, even though it was 1 a.m. A cab driver witnesses this and follows the car. The car was a white Chevy Blazer. And he follows it several blocks and loses it, but he gets some of the tag, some of the license plate. Mm-hmm. He gets like five out of the 6 digits of the license plate. It was like letters, and then, or 4 out of the 5 digits, I think it was. 3 letters and a number. Or just the letters. I think it was just the letters. He calls it in. They send it out to police. So that vehicle, that white Chevy Blazer, had been rented from Enterprise. And as it happened, Enterprise had registered 3 identical white Chevy Blazers when they bought this. And they all were being rented in Philly. And because they were registered together, they had identical plates but consecutive numbers. Mm-hmm. Of course, the cab driver only got the letters and not the numbers. So wouldn't you know it, but Chester was in one of the 3 Chevy Blazers that had also been rented by his friend, and he was borrowing it, had the same 3 letters, and was stopped 5 minutes away from the crime, 5 minutes after the crime, like 6 blocks from the crime scene, mm-hmm. in the car that was identified as a getaway. Essentially, the car was identified as a getaway car. Chester met the general description, though, of course, his clothing completely was different.
And what was the general? When you say he met the general description? So
he was a young African-American man, basically. Mm-hmm. He fit the general description. And there were 2 women in the getaway cars described by witnesses. And so he's in a car with 1 young woman and himself. His clothes don't match any of the clothing description given, but he met the general description. And, of course, he's in this unique car, right? So the police were convinced they had caught the guy, even though there were supposed to be 4 people in the car. There were only 2. His clothing didn't match. There was no gun. There was no proceeds. And so they arrest him and charge him based upon a coerced statement they took from the girl he was with. What's interesting
I'm gonna have to ask you, how often do coerced statements occur? Like, this is somebody that wasn't involved at all, knew nothing about this. How does
I mean, I would say
people are going to say
common. It's not common, but it's more common than you would think. In other words, it's not common, but it happens, and mm-hmm. and this was an era when it probably happened more than it does maybe today. And it was not. There were many cases. So there's been many people exonerated from that era, and oftentimes it involved either a coerced confession from the person accused or witnesses. Mm-hmm. And so it's not. I'm not going to say it's common in the sense that it's not like one at. I'm not saying it's probably. I wouldn't even know how to say how many cases it was, but it's not common. I mean, and thank God it's not, because who wants to live in a country where 1 out of every 3 cases is involved in a coerced statement. But what most people say, and people who are not involved in the criminal justice system at all, nobody would confess. Nobody would admit to something if they didn't do it. Of course, it's just not true. That's not true.